Did you know that there's a queen who bathed in blood? What did she do it for? You'll find out in this video. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any new videos. Welcome to the Legends and Myths channel, the queen who bathed in blood. Have you ever heard of this story? There are many stories about the bloodbaths of the Hungarian noblewoman Elizabeth Báthory. But was she really bathing in the blood of innocent girls? Was she insane or just misunderstood? What is true and what is false? Let's find out. In the second half of the 16th century, rumors began to circulate in Transylvania about a cruel countess who delighted in torturing young girls and dipping her bread in their blood. The rumors eventually reached the king, and he sent his royal notary, an official empowered to administer oaths and to draw up legal documents, to investigate the allegations against Elizabeth Báthory, the 17th Countess of Erla. This is where our story begins. According to the records of the investigation conducted by the notary, the first accusation against Elizabeth came from a servant girl who claimed that she had witnessed the countess torturing young girls at night. However, when the servant was asked to testify in court, she suddenly changed her tune and stated that she had never seen the alleged atrocities. Many believed that she was pressured by Elizabeth and her family, who apparently used underhanded methods to get rid of witnesses. Even though the countess appeared to be innocent, the king wasn't convinced. In 1580, he confiscated her property and put Elizabeth under house arrest, prohibiting her from leaving the estate without permission. He also ordered her to open her doors and windows at night, so that people could see that she was undoing anything suspicious after dark. No one knows whether the order was carried out, and we can only speculate why the king didn't just arrest the countess if he suspected that she was guilty. Perhaps he feared that the charges against her were false, and he didn't want to ruin her reputation. Or maybe he just wanted to keep an eye on her. But for years passed and no one complained about Elizabeth's behavior, so the king revoked the ban on her leaving the estate and returned all her confiscated property. He probably thought that he had made a mistake and that the woman was innocent. However, the accusations didn't stop there. On March 1585, Georgi Count accused Elizabeth of having poisoned his wife, who died shortly after drinking wine from a goblet that Elizabeth had given her. An investigation was launched, and the king appointed a special judge to examine the case. However, Georgi's claim was considered false because his wife had apparently left a confession stating that she had taken poison voluntarily to end her life. Later, George will regret this. By that time, Elizabeth was considered one of the richest women in Hungary. Her husband, Nicholas, was the vice-regent of Hungary and the governor of Transylvania. So, Elizabeth enjoyed great prestige in society. But suddenly, the nobles began to die mysteriously. First, it was George's wife, and then other aristocrats followed. People began to say that the countess was poisoning them. Soon, King Rudolph V received a letter signed by the judges who investigated the death of George's wife, accusing Elizabeth of murdering the nobles to take their estates and property. They requested that she be arrested. However, despite the pressure, the king didn't want to believe that the respected countess was a monster who dipped her bread in the blood of children. He sent two royal counselors to interrogate her, and they found out that Elizabeth had been seen with several victims shortly before their deaths. So the king decided not to wait any longer and ordered Elizabeth's arrest. The countess spent 6 weeks in prison while the investigation was underway. Then she was released, and the case was closed. It seemed that once again Elizabeth managed to avoid punishment, but it was far from over. 3 days later, a nobleman whose son had died under mysterious circumstances wrote to the king demanding justice. His letter included some disturbing details about the countess. He said that Elizabeth invited young men and women to her home, promising to help them marry well. However, once inside, she locked the gates, threw most of the food out the window, and only gave the servants stale bread. She forced the guests to drink wine until they were drunk and then dragged them to the bedrooms. None of the guests ever left alive. The king couldn't ignore these allegations, and he sent a new team of investigators to uncover the truth. They went to the countess's castle and found 3 chambers filled with corpses. At first, they thought that Elizabeth had killed these people, but the investigation revealed that they had died of starvation. Apparently, the countess invited people to her castle, kept them locked up until they died, and then threw their bodies into the cesspool. After that, she allegedly dipped bread in their blood. However, there's no evidence to support this claim. It was just a rumor. Elizabeth's troubles were far from over. A few days later, the investigator found another room full of corpses, and then he noticed that one of the walls was covered with blood. However, it turned out that it wasn't human blood. The wall was stained with beetroot juice, but who would believe that after all these murders, Elizabeth was immediately sentenced to death and thrown into prison. She spent 8 years behind bars until her husband and son, who had become the Count of Erla, managed to bribe the king and convince him to pardon her. Elizabeth's release was a shock to everyone. The public expected that she would be executed, but instead, she was set free. The next day, the grateful countess distributed gold coins among the poor, supposedly using the blood money to atone for her crimes. In fact, she continued to live a carefree life until her death in 1614. She died during a plague epidemic, which saved her from being tried for heinous crimes. So was Elizabeth really bathing in the blood of young girls? The answer is probably no. Where did the blood come from? It is entirely possible that the blood was from animals, and that Elizabeth's enemies deliberately spread rumors about her bathing in human blood. Elizabeth didn't kill anyone. Maybe she was just an eccentric old woman who liked to dip her bread in blood. Or perhaps she was the victim of a conspiracy by nobles who wanted to take her land. It's impossible to say for sure, but that's not the point. The thing is, throughout history, there have been countless cases when innocent people have been convicted based on circumstantial evidence or false testimony. We can't know the whole truth, and that's why it's important not to jump to conclusions. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments below. And that's all for today. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. See you soon. Bye.